Yeah, okay. Okay, wonderful. So, dear Thai, dear community, thank you for being present this evening. So, this evening we will have an opportunity to listen to Antoine Lutz, to his experience and his insights as a neuroscientist. And before I will say a few more words, I would like to invite everybody to listen to 3 sounds of the bell. So we can start together and we can feel our body and return to our breathing. Feel the sensation of breathing in and breathing out. Dear Thai, dear community, thank you for being here tonight with us. This retreat is called Understanding Our Mind, and I think when we say understanding our mind a little bit better, maybe it is also more correct. Understanding our mind is a very broad area, and I think we can always learn more. So understanding our mind, it also means we can always learn more, and we can always learn more about our mind, the way our mind functions. And so in organizing this retreat, we also have done our best to reach out to scientists who also study the brain and who are also meditating. They also have a meditation experience. And so for the next coming days, we have found 4 neuroscientists or 4 scientists who are happy to share their experience with us. And tonight, this scientist is Antoine Lutz, and he is he's a neurologist, and he is studying especially the brain of people who are meditating already for a long time. And so he has had many experiences, and he has worked with Richard Davidson in the US. And so tonight he will be the first one sharing his experience with us. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Liam Cavanaugh. And Liam has also helped us to organize the neuroscience retreat of last year. And he has also been helping us to organize this year's retreat. And so he is actually the one who has contacted the scientists. And he himself is also a scientist and a practitioner. And his science is about cognitive dissonance and also about unconscious behavior. And so we are very grateful that also Liam helped us to organize and to contact neuroscientists. And so we can learn from them, and I think it helps us to offer a very rich retreat with many insights and many different ways of understanding our mind and understanding the way our brain functions. So for this evening, we will first listen to the dialogue. It's a dialogue. It means we would like to give for this evening Antoine Lutz the opportunity to share his experience, and he has a lot of experience. He's been working for a long time with meditators and seeing the effects of meditation on the brain. And if afterwards, because this will take about 1 hour, if afterwards you would like to ask a question, you can do so. So Zoom actually has a chat function, and so if you have a question, you can also, during the interview, you can already type in a question that you have, and then we have a little bit of time to select a few questions. We don't have so much time, but we may have time for about 2 to 3 questions. And also be aware, or we would like to ask you, if you ask a question, then and we select your question, we think that's a really helpful question for many people, then we will ask you to ask that question directly to Dr. Antoine Lutz. And so for that we need your permission, or if you ask a question, then we assume that you agree that we are recording your question, or we are recording you asking the question. So that is a matter of that you agree with that. So you ask a question, and then automatically, so to say, you agree to be recorded. And so that is important for us, because also this afterwards we would also like to be able for other people who may not have the chance to view it directly tonight, so that they also later on they have an opportunity to see this sharing, and also including the questions that may be asked. So I think this is just a brief introduction, and so we will start listening now to the panel sharing. So enjoy the panel sharing.
So, thank you for joining us. My name is Liam Cavanaugh. I'm practicing with Plum Village and also Director of Research at Life Itself, which is an organization which seeks to build a network between people who are contemplative but also interested in social activism and rigor, intellectual rigor that can be helpful in understanding the world around us. And today we have a dialogue between Phap and our esteemed guest, Antoine Lutz, who is a director of research at the Lyon Neuroscience Center, a long-time researcher in meditation before it was popular, who has interest in the neurophenomenology and the correlates of subjective experience and neurological events, interest in reification, long-term changes in the neurology or the neural activity of meditators, long-term meditators, and many other subjects. Is that a fair introduction, Antoine?
Wonderful, thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And so I guess maybe if you could start by just telling us more about your journey in to become a scientist who studies meditation or meditators, and also you ask very interesting and questions involving first-person experience, which is of course what people are doing in this course, and the attempt to look at that scientifically. And so if you could just explain to us a little bit about that journey, that would be very
Yes,
very interesting and useful.
Well, I started to work on this topic about 20 years ago. At the time, I was finishing a degree in engineering in France, and I was not totally satisfied with the job of an engineer, so I was trying to do some research. And while I was still looking for what I was interested to do with my life, I started to do some philosophy on the side at the Sorbonne. So I get a bachelor in philosophy also, and where I learned in particular about the tradition in philosophy called Phenomenology, which is a school of philosophy popular in continental philosophy in Europe, and that was mostly invented by a German philosopher, Husserl, but then by some French philosopher like Merleau-Ponty, and it was really a very unexpected introduction to meditation through this lineage of philosophy. But I was really interested in exploring experience and how consciousness is building a perceived sense of reality. And so with this background, I serendipitously discover cognitive science, and it sounds really nice for me because it was a mixture of science and humanities, philosophy. And so I did a master in cognitive science in Paris. And one of my teacher was someone named Francisco Varela, who was really deeply influenced me. He was a brilliant biologist, but he was also a long-term practitioner. And he the founder of also the Mind and Life Institute. And Francisco has been the pioneer in conducting a dialogue between contemplative and scientist. So when I met with him during my master, I asked him if I could continue to do a PhD with him. So he agreed, and then I went to do my military services, which was I did that in doing research in Berkeley University, and I started to do retreat at that time in different traditions. And then when I came back with him, I tried to combine these three types of knowledge from a kind of engineering, and knowledge from cognitive science and phenomenology. And then I tried to do applied phenomenology, which is essentially meditation. So that's one thing that Francisco really told me quite early, that if you want to study consciousness of the mind, you need to start to know, to get acquainted with your own mind. So that was actually a very interesting move, because for a long time I was trying to, like everyone, to give meaning to my life by trying to through knowledge, like academic knowledge. So try to get a sense through science, the law of causality, through history, philosophy. And what was really a turning moment for me was to discover the tradition of phenomenology and meditation, which kind of changed the question somehow. Instead of trying to get at the meaning of everything in the world, you try to turn attention inward and try to see how your mind is creating, actually giving meaning to an appearance, to reality. So it's really this pivotal conversion of attention from outside to inside, which was very rich for me and very very nourishing. And that was interesting because that's really, I think, the type of research that Francisco was trying to do. So in a nutshell, when you study science, your attention is toward the object or the law of physics, the law of biology, and so on. But more and more scientists who work on the mind and on consciousness, they start to realize that this just only characterizing matter is not going to be sufficient. You need to take into account what is called sometimes a view from within, which is the fact that organisms are that life and organism are building, are generating meanings and have an inner model of the world or of themselves, and that's then you start to be more interesting by the question of how.
Breathing in, I am aware of my whole body. Breathing out, I smile to my whole body. Aware of body, smiling to body. Breathing in, I know I am alive. Breathing out, I feel the joy of being alive. Being alive, feeling joy. Breathing in, I am aware, I am in touch with the nature around me. I hear the birds sing. I breathe in the fresh air. Breathing out, I smile to life inside and around me. Being aware of the nature around me, smiling to life in and around me. Breathing in, I enjoy having nothing to do. Breathing out, I enjoy having to go nowhere. Nothing to do, nowhere to go.
To know, to get acquainted with your own mind. So that was actually a very interesting move, because for a long time, I was trying to, like everyone, to give meaning to my life by trying to, through knowledge, like academic knowledge. So try to get a sense through science, the law of causality, through history, philosophy. And what was really a turning moment for me was to discover the tradition of phenomenology and meditation, which kind of changed the question somehow. Instead of trying to get at the meaning of everything in the world, you try to turn attention inward and try to see how your mind is creating, actually giving meaning to an appearance, to reality. So it's really this pivotal conversion of attention from outside to inside, which was very rich for me and very very nourishing. And that was interesting, because that's really, I think, the type of research that Francisco was trying to do. So in a nutshell, when you study science, your attention is toward the object, or the law of physics, the law of biology, and so on. But more and more scientists who work on the mind and on consciousness, they start to realize that this just only look characterizing matter is not going to be sufficient. You need to take into account what is called sometimes a view from within, which is the fact that organisms are that life and organism are building, are generating meanings, and have an inner model of the world or of themselves, and then you start to be more interesting by the question of how does the life and how does the that's why you can really connect experience and consciousness. So that's really a kind of the heart of what I'm trying to understand, is this relationship between a physiological process, like in particular neuroscience, and the first person. And Francisco has this notion of neurophenomenology, which was really try to explore the circulation between a description of consciousness from within, so through experience, and a description of consciousness from third person, which is through scientific observation, behavioral measure, and so on. And there's still what I find essential is to try to hold together these two important point of entry to describe the mind, and try to really try to think about the type of epistemology to articulate the relationship between the lived experience and matter and physiology. And meditation is a particularly interesting model for that, because you are developing, you try to develop and emphasize and foster a certain first-person quality, like insight about yourself, understanding about the mind, and that was very interesting, because this training aspect of meditation is very appealing for scientists, because when you say training, you say also change, and when you say change, you mean you can measure it. So part of my work has been trying to make relationship between training the mind in a certain way through meditation and try to identify what was changing in physiology, in behavior, in experience. And you have to, and I have to say that now meditation become quite trendy, but back in the day when I decided to do a PhD on that topic, and then a postdoc actually, and going to the US to meet Richard Davidson and to continue this work. The director of the lab in France at the time told me that I was essentially quitting science. So it's interesting to say to remember that not so long ago, all this work on meditation and science was actually quite rare and not very well respected. And what was fascinating is to see how very quickly, maybe within 2 to 3 decades, things had changed, and now it's become extremely mainstream. I'm always amazed how, for instance, in many hospitals now you have mindfulness-based intervention. In Lyon, for instance, we have now a training program for medical doctors and for medical students on meditation. And throughout the world, there are researchers working on these topics, clinicians applying it. And so it's quite fascinating to see how things have changed quite quickly. So it's good to rejoice on this type of changes.
I'm sure Phap saw you're happy to hear this as well. Did you would you like to take us more on maybe the long-term meditators' experiences and research that you did?
Sure. So my work on meditation, I focus mostly on mechanism. So I'm using tools on brain imaging, also different paradigms from cognitive science to look at different mental functions. And when we start this work, actually, in 2001, I think there was a meeting between the Dalai Lama and Richard Davidson and Francisco Varela in India, when they decided that well, all these dialogue were fine, but it was time to try to go beyond just exchanging ideas and to see whether some of these claims from the Buddhist tradition could be measured and tested. And so Mathieu Ricard facilitate help us to identify experts in this particular case in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and as a point of entry to start to explore and document a potential effect of meditation training. So we look for experts, and that was based on the literature on expertise in cognitive science. When someone who have done typically about 10,000 hours in applying a given skills is considered an expert. So for instance, you can be an expert as a medical doctor, or as a chess player, or as a violinist. So all of this domain are a form of cognitive expertise. And while we try to see whether you could have also a form of metacognitive or affective expertise in when you train to cultivate presence, mindfulness, or benevolence, kindness, whether that would be translated into also some form of expertise. And so we invited a group of expert practitioners in Madison, and we tried we did some very basic measures. One task was just simply to observe their electroencephalogram when they were meditating, and we tried to look at whether some brain oscillatory activity was changing while they meditate. And it was because there is a whole domain of research in cognitive science that try to look at the relationship between a different brain oscillatory rhythm and mental function. And why? Because as you know, the neurons are little electrical devices that are sending electrical signal, but also chemical signal, but it's essentially like electrical impulses, and oscillatory rhythm are a mechanism by which you can glue together a large group of neurons together. And according to that framework, when you're perceiving, say, an object, or you're doing something that requires the collective synchronization or coordination of a large number of brain regions, one possible mechanism is through this to temporal coordination of the action potential, and that could be well affected by this different oscillation. And so the different oscillation, some are very slow frequency and fast frequency, and they play different functions, and you can measure very coarsely them on the scalp using electroencephalography. So that's what we've done. And you can measure very coarsely them on the scalp using electroencephalography. So that's what we've done. It's a very coarse approach, but it was just a way to observe. It's like putting a microphone above say a stadium and measuring how people are chanting together, you know. And so we just look at this oscillatory pattern, and what we observe is that when experts are engaged in meditation for a couple of minutes, you can start to see a specific pattern of oscillation and coherence across different brain regions in a frequency range that has been related to attention processes or high order functions. So that was one of the first observation of a neural signature of meditative states. And what was fun to watch is that when you expert was stopping to meditate, you could still see almost that this pattern of coordination was remaining like coherent and dynamically coherent for like a couple of minutes after it, even if they stopped to meditate, almost like reflecting that the fact that when you meditate, there's maybe some form of entrainment of different brain networks that are coupled together, and they remain coupled together for quite some times. And what was interesting in this observation also that the frequency at which they were oscillating, it was, some of them were in some fast frequency oscillation that are partly important to induce neuroplasticity. So it's possible that that's when you train your mind to be resonating and working together, or you have this different ensemble that are working together. That's maybe a way to build certain pathway in your brain. And this is a very general, it's nothing specific to meditation, but that's a general mechanism by which you can understand how the brain functions. Essentially, building internal model about the world or itself, but then trying to create also habits and learning things, and so what we and other I try to then, based on this type of measure, to see whether you could induce plasticity induced by meditation. And for that, we use a different technique, which is more functional brain imagery, when you can look at the structure of the brain, and that in that case, you try to see whether this type of functioning of the brain, this type of coherence of habits that are built through meditation practice, whether that's through times, day after days, that are going to maybe impact the structure itself of the brain. So we know already that for instance, the brain of expert musician or taxi driver is different from novices, because you train certain brain region a lot, and you can see that the side of the gray matter is enlarged in this region. Similarly, what we know now from this type of research is that when you train someone to meditate for a couple of weeks or months, you can see change in a specific brain region, in particular region involved in attention regulation, attention control, if you train mindfulness. And you can train, but if you train other style of meditation, let's say loving kindness, empathy, benevolence, you can see then a training in different region more involved in feelings, like the insula. So now we can see that what emerged from this field is that when you train the mind in a certain way, it matters, and you can see then a trace in some mental function, like in the EEG or the connectivity of the brain. And then when you follow this type of training across time, you can then see change even in the structure of the brain.
I guess it's interesting, and maybe if Phap, you can, it'd be interesting to have your thoughts on this, that there's certain kind of research which is a bit like when we're saying, well, is meditation a good idea for me? It's a bit like you look at a friend and they did meditation and you say, oh, he seems less stressed, or he seems, to be happier. And it's sort of like a systematic way of doing that. And then there's another kind of research which you're also into, which is a little bit more attempting to shed light some of the experiences you actually have as a meditator, going into dealing with pain and de-reifying it, or saying, okay, like everybody could do it right now. They might have a pain somewhere in their body, and they can go into that pain and just, as we say, take care of it, and suddenly it changes in a way. And we see moment to moment the timing of our attention, our quality of attention, and our experience changes. But it seems less of that second type of research has been done. But you're doing it. So maybe it would be interesting to hear some of the challenges of that, and why is there less of that done, so that we could hear some of the things that we talk about are maybe quite well studied. Other things are not as well studied. So the methodological differences between these approaches could be interesting.
So yeah, so in some of the vast majority of the studies, I mean, we're talking about now several thousand of publication. Many of them are clinical study where essentially someone are training, applying a meditation program like MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, for instance, and then measuring some kind of self-report measure, different questionnaires, and so on. And so that's interesting. But what's sometimes missing is an understanding of the mechanism of action. So with several colleagues, that's really an area of our work, is to develop models about the specific mechanism involved in mindfulness. And if you want, I can try to point out to some of the core mechanisms that I think are important, and try to give you some brief example about how we measure that and how we try to operationalize this construct. So, in a nutshell, there are if we need to simplify at the maximum, you have at least three kind of capacities. One is a capacity to simply learn where you put your attention. When you do, for instance, mindful breathing, you're training about controlling where you put your mind, moment after moment. I'm sure that everyone listening to this talk is familiar with this practice, when you put your mind on the breath, for instance, and then you see yourself distracted, and so on and so on. So the first capacity is trained to regulate attention and where you orient your attention. But then you have that's trained ultimately to develop a capacity which is more. So this capacity trains, say, the capacity to hold the mind on an object moment after moment, and the capacity to monitor changes and this monitoring capacity is, we think, one a central aspect of mindfulness training. This knowing capacity, this metacognitive or meta-awareness skills that are trained in mindfulness. And one metaphor to discuss that is, sometimes you are lost in a movie, and then when you watch a movie in the theater, and becoming aware here, I mean, knowing that you're watching the movie. So coming back to the theater and knowing that you're in the theater watching a movie and not being lost in the movie. So that's one core construct. And the other one is what you refer as derification, or a different term. You can say subjective realism is the fact that mental events or perception, emotion, or thoughts appear to phenomenologically, to appear subjectively as being permanent, solid, and real. So if you take the example of a distrustful thoughts, someone who is depressed, he's gonna keep rehearsing the same thought, watching again and again the same fight with someone, or the same whatever situation or difficult moment or exchange it with someone, and rehearsing it and changing the story. And anyway, so when you do that, you are engaged with your thoughts as if they were real, and so part of and solid. And part of our effort is try to measure this capacity of the mind to make things as solid and real, and to see how meditation, or particularly mindfulness meditation, could help to suspend or letting go or de-verify this representation. So to give you a little exercise, you can even visualize, for instance, that you just bite into it, and you can feel see the juice coming out of it, and everything is very, make it very present in your mind for a couple of seconds. Make it very vivid. As if you were about to bite into it. Okay. So it's easier to do this exercise when you see an actual image of a strawberry, but maybe if you're really good at mental imagery, that's fine. And so I could ask the audience, or I could ask you, what was your experience briefly when you've done that exercise? Phap, you want to share your experience, maybe?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I imagined quite a big strawberry, which was in front of me. It was quite alive, and actually, I had a strawberry this morning, so maybe it was also a little bit easier to go back to that experience. And actually, anyway, it was quite nice, and I like strawberries. I have a relatively good connection to strawberries, so it was pleasant to be there. And yeah, it was not far away. I had it this morning. So.
And did you have any bodily response to it?
I think there was some saliva that was
okay.
kind of like coming up. Yeah.
Okay. And did you have some thought also coming, or?
No, not so much. It's just that I was just more focused on the strawberry.
Okay. And Liam, what was your experience? Thank you.
Well, I've tasted I felt like the anticipation of the strawberry, sort of a bit feeling this strawberry and feeling the anticipation of the taste of the strawberry. And then there was this second wave of like tingling or anticipation in the tongue, where I could almost taste it, like this, I guess, coming with a desire for it, this sort of feeling of oncoming desire, and then almost like maybe some negativity that like I wish I had it, of course I was.
Okay, so thanks. So what like we run an experiment when we present pictures of food that people like, and for instance the strawberry, and then we ask them to absorb into them and verify it, meaning make it seem as real and as if they were in front of them. And then we give them different scales about to report their experience. So how much real it appear, how much the degree of craving they had, and amount of desire. And we also measure before and after this experience. We ask them to spit in a little tube their salivation for a couple of for 1 or 2 minutes. So they spit as much as they could, and that's was used to exactly as Phap described, that there is this feeling of this salivation that you have. I mean, that's very normal. It's this kind of physiological reflex that you have before eating food. And that, as Liam said, also this craving feeling that also comes with it. So what we found is that when you do this manipulation, compared to an instruction, when you ask simply to look at the same images, but to observe them, to become aware of thoughts, feeling tone, emotion tone that come with the experience of these images, we found that there were much more salivation involved in this absorption aspect, and also more sense of real, more sense of craving, and compared to this mindful stance. And in mindful one, you had more like a sense of meta-awareness also. So that was kind of looking at, and what was interesting, that the more people report that they were craving and feeling attracted by the food, the more you see an increase in their salivation. So it was very nice because you could relate something very like this kind of first person, what we call subjective realism, like this capacity to make things appear as real in your mind. And you could see that it has directly consequences on your physiological response in your body. And so that's a nice relationship between experience and bodily measures. And so we've done this manipulation, and that was already very interesting. But what was also one of my motivation is to look at the consequences of this type of manipulation on mental habits. So then we ask them to do a task when they saw the same images, but now we told them not just they were in the background of the screen, and then in front of them there were two objects that they had to target, one either a square or a circle, and that task was to actually press with one hand to detect a circle and the other hand to detect the square. So nothing to do with the food, okay? But the food was in the background. And so just need to press and so. But the difference was that what was important, that associated to the square, for instance, when you were pressing the square, the image was approaching to you after it, while when you were pressing the circle, the image was moving away from you. And that was almost simulating, when you start to do it for quite some time, what we call an approach or an avoidance behavior. Okay, and our research question was to see whether the more attachment that as you discussed, or reification, the more you add that stance, whether that was then an implication on this mental habits of holding or grasping the object or not. Because what we found is that what's happening is that when you present the same strawberry, okay, and you need to press a square, for instance, that is coming back to you, then it's in a way you want the strawberry and the thing is approaching, so you press quite fast. But unconsciously, implicitly, if you then have let's say the triangle that is moving away, and you have the strawberry, then there is a slight conflict in the mind, which is unconscious, because on the one hand you want the strawberry, but you also have to the triangle is associated to an avoidance, and so we test whether this imprint of craving was amplifying this approach avoidance tendencies. And indeed, what we found is that the more people were engaged and making strawberry real, the more the tendency they had to be biased by the food in the tasks, such as they were slower to respond to a target which was with some avoidance. So it was very nice, because we can also see that it's almost, and that was modulated by the state of mindfulness compared to immersion. So that's an interesting paradigm to see really the consequences of certain mental states and craving, how it can then impact habits. Now, the limitation of this design is that we couldn't separate. It was really a difference of two states, so a state of immersion and a state of mindfulness, and we find a difference between the two. We didn't have time to run a third task when they were doing nothing, so it's hard to know whether the difference is produced by a very strong immersion or very strong regulation on mindfulness. We need to do that in another study, but still it's very useful as an observation. So that's an example of the type of work we try to do to look really at mechanism. And it's an important construct, this notion of reification, because clinical colleagues which are working on depression, for instance, they found that, so it's a group from Zindel-Ziegel in Toronto, and they're really world experts on depression, and they've done the best work on looking at the impact of the preventive effect of mindfulness on depression relapse. So it's a specific program which is mixing mindfulness with cognitive therapy. It's called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and they repeatedly found with very rigorous study that this style of practice, it's 8-week intervention, that can help participants, depressed patient, chronically depressed patient, not to relapse into depression. And then their theory is that what's happened is that you are kind of protecting helping the patient to not to fall into certain mental habits, certain schema, which are really driving you back to depression. And often it's have to do with in rumination. Grooming is really one of the key factor to relapse. And so in this framework, what they found recently is that the magnitude of so they train person to meditate for 8 weeks, and then they follow up for several months and looking at who it was practicing and what was the type of change in the experience. And they found that people who are practicing the most and for whom this kind of derification, or what they call it decentering. So this capacity to decenter from thoughts or derify thoughts, that was the best predictor of if you were developing this capacity, you could really prevent yourself the most from depression. So what I just illustrate is that you can generalize this idea. I illustrate with food craving, but you could also do it with thoughts. You know, if you change your relation to thoughts as just a thought, that might be one way to explain why, in the case of depression, you can prevent from depression. So
I mean, of course, it's useful. The second noble truth of the Dhamma, of course, is that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Phap, that the source of all suffering is sort of the attachment, right? And so, of course, it's the clinical and implications of this research. If science could actually show it, is absolutely enormous. But I'm getting the feeling from your description of the methodology has to be very, very clever to capture these effects, this internal effects, and so that it just turns out to be very difficult to show. So maybe that's part of the reason why there could be a great deal of truth to this, but science has difficulty demonstrating these types of effects. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's the genuine challenge that all of these things are about experience and subjectivity. If I take the example of the strawberries, it's really how the agent is choosing to relate to the strawberry. And similarly in depression is how much you are choosing to relate to your thought as a true depiction of who you are. So for instance, you could say, the thought is saying that I am a bad person. And if you choose to really, or I'm worthless, if you choose to look at the thought as really a true depiction of yourself, that's really something very subjective. Or you could just try to relate to it differently as this is just a thought. I'm not my thoughts. And so the novelty and the difficulty that all of that is very, very subjective and in essence. And so when, as a scientist, you want to demonstrate something, meaning in our case, you want to go beyond simply self-report, you need to be able to objectify somehow some of these constructs. And so you can do it by measuring, for instance, indirectly the indirect impact of that, for instance, on stress, on inflammation, and so on. Or you can measure on the behavior, as I illustrate, or you can look at some brain marker, for instance. But the difficulty is to really be able to control both the first person dimension and then also to be able to find the right paradigms to measure it. So it's difficult, and I think, yeah, it's yeah, but the things are moving quite fast. So we hope to be in a couple of years to have more and more marker and good paradigms to capture some of aspect of meditation training. And if you have time, I can briefly discuss one very promising framework to do that when it comes to acute pain, for instance. I don't know if you still have time or.
Phap, what do you think?
I think that sounds good.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So maybe let's Liam, you were talking about the Four Noble Truths. I mean, this one is really the study on pain regulation is an obvious candidate to look at the impact of meditation. So they've been there are several clinical studies that have been run on in particular on chronic pain patients. Actually, one of the first study by John Kabat-Zinn was on chronic pain patient. But again, the difficulty that often this study did not focus explicitly on the active mechanism. And so that's with the PhD students, we recently conducted a study, so with Yele Zorn in our group, looking at some of this mechanism of pain regulation. So I can very briefly explain that, and it's kind of an extension of what I just said. Essentially, we try to look at the role of meta-awareness and derification in pain regulation. So, and in the cognitive science, when it comes to pain regulation, it's very close to the very older sutra on the second hour of pain. So, as all of you know, this famous parable from the Buddha, or when he says that the untrained mind is suffering twice. First the first hour of physical pain, and then all the fears, the anger, the avoidance, the complaint, the anticipation, all of these mental factors that make the person suffer twice, and so we really try to take literally this parable to see whether mindfulness training is helping the patient specifically to deal with the second hour of pain. And based on what I just said on the exercise of the strawberry or the exercise of the depression, it's probably very clear now how it might work. So, so for instance, I don't know if we have time to a quick, you want to do a quick experiential exercise, for instance, or maybe or maybe you're all familiar with pain, no? I think, and meditation. What do you think?
Yeah, if you'd like to do it, Antoine, then please. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, quickly, yeah. Well, if you want, for instance, you can try to, either you're very lucky and you have right now some pain, and that might be the case when you do retreat, or you can induce some pain, for instance, on pressing in some acupressure point, like here, for instance. You can press and see if it works for you. You can really induce some very acute and light pain. And then just do it gently, don't hurt yourself. And just to see what's in your experience, what's happening. And often when you do this kind of mindfulness of pain meditation, what we're learning is to try to be aware of not only the physical sensation of pain, but also the elaborative or thinking aspect of it. For instance, the hope that is gonna stop, or the little voice of frustration that the pain is still here, or the fear that the pain will remain forever, or sense of helplessness, the anger that you can't, that you didn't deserve this pain. All of these feelings or emotions, often they are mixed with the sensation, and they're all gathered together. And when you train in mindfulness of pain, is to try to watch all of that and somehow uncouple or be aware of this different component, and gradually you can watch them as different aspects or of the experience of pain, and often there's a recognition of this that some of these elements are changing, so that some of the thoughts that don't last, some of these emotions don't last, but the feeling is also sometimes changing. You start to recognize more the dynamical aspect of pain, and the fact that it's a multi-dimensional aspect, multi-dimensional experience. So that's kind of the introduction to what we try to do, and I mean, what you experience is essentially what we try to do. That's how it guides the paradigm that we've done. And I'm going to present quickly is that essentially we try to do the same thing but in the lab, and we induce an acute pain using a thermode, one you can put here and on the wrist, and then you put some hot water on it. And so for a couple of seconds, you can experience a very hot water, like as if you put your hand under hot tap water. So it's unpleasant, it's kind of acute, but at that temperature around 48, it can't really burn you, but it's really unpleasant. And what we do is that we have two conditions. Either a person is having a hot one or a warm one. And to really trigger a kind of exaggeration of pain, we warn them in advance that they're going to get a hot one or a warm one. And the idea is that we're going to see whether some people are more prone to anxiety or fear of anticipatory anxiety or not. And then we do two durations for pain stimuli, either a short one or a long one. And they don't know in advance whether they're going to have a short one or the long one. And right at the end of a short interval, we tell them, now it's going to be a long one, or now it was a short one and you release. And we try to measure how much hope they have and how much frustrated they are when it's a long one. And by manipulating the duration and the uncertainty, we want to see whether there's some people who are prone to exaggerate pain are going to be amplify more the experience of pain when it's a long one. So, and then at the end of the trial, we ask them to rate the intensity of the pain and the unpleasantness of the pain. And to make a long story short, our prediction is that that with meditator, you can somehow uncouple the sensory aspect from the affective one, and that uncoupling could be reflected by a difference in the amplitude of the affective response relative to the sensory one. So in a way, our prediction is that when you train expert meditator will have typically report high intensity when it's high, because that's what it is. But then the aversion aspect is going to be much lower than the short one. And that would be also particularly true in the long one compared to the short one. Why? Because in the long one, the more you give time, the more you have this kind of monkey mind that can exaggerate and amplify the second hour of pain. So during the long one, we think that actually that's where really the experts are going to be able to downregulate and the novice are going to amplify it. Okay, and indeed that's what we found, that there was this uncoupling between sensory and affective was clearly stronger for the novice compared to the expert, and that was particularly true during the long one compared to the short one. So this amplification was enhanced by the long one for the novice, but not for the experts. And what was very exciting is that we then use also a scale called the pain catastrophizing scale. So the pain catastrophizing scale is a trait measure questionnaire that measures how much people have a tendency to really get a sense of worry when they have pain, or a sense of helplessness, or a sense of anxiety, or any kind of exaggeration, which is essentially a measure of the second hour of pain. And we found that indeed the experts meditator is much lower on that scale than the novices. And we found that the more people are have high on this scale of pain catastrophizing, the more you will see a lack of uncoupling between the intensity and the affective response. So to make a long story short, you can show that this capacity to uncouple the intense sensory and affective response seems to be a very good predictor of your capacity to regulate the second order of pain. And so we found that behaviorally, and we also did the task in the scanner. And what we found is that so far we finished analyzing the anticipatory response to pain. And we found that indeed during this anticipatory period, you can really see a difference between experts and novices. With experts having less activation in the brain regions called the anterior insula that are really about feelings. And in that case, it is also involved in the anticipation of future feelings. When you feel that you're going to be, it's almost a internal representation of your future feelings. And so novices compared to experts have the tendency to project themselves in the future, anticipating the unpleasant experience more, and than the expert. And the more they were doing that, the less they were able to uncouple the intensity and unpleasantness during the pain itself. So that's a recent finding which is not yet published, but that's also illustrates, I think, very nicely how we try to understand the mechanism by which meditation can work on acute pain in general and more broadly on suffering.
I mean, I suppose you must have, well, it must make it easy to get out of bed in the morning to be able to elucidate these types of things. I think was a question we were interested in.
Well, yeah, you need to talk. So sometimes these stories are very exciting to tell, but in this study, for instance, the student is going to defend his PhD next Tuesday, and it takes like literally 5 years to get at that finding. It takes almost 2 years to collect long-term practitioners, to convince them to come to the lab. And then you need to, working with brain imaging is extremely complicated, and there's a lot of technical issues. It's statistically very complex. So it's, for PhD students, it requires a lot of skills to be able to finalize a study like that. So it's a lot of work. It's exciting, but it's a lot of work. But I'm really proud of what he's done on this study, and I'm also very grateful to all the experts who came to the lab. And on that topic, I want also to thank the experts who are from the Prunier community, Yusanga, who came to participate to another study on aging that is ongoing in Caen. So we reached out to some of you to help us to look at the benefic effect of meditation on aging. And some of your brother and sister came to help us to look at the impact of their practice on aging. So thank you so much.
Actually, I have one short question I was kind of like interested in, and that is if for yourself, like if whatever you experience, like if it is pain or if it is sadness.
Since you can imagine for a couple of seconds your favorite food. So things, for instance, about a strawberry, very fresh strawberry. And try to mentally make it present in front of you. And you can even visualize, for instance, that you just bite into it, and you can feel see the juice coming out of it, and everything is very, make it very present in your mind for a couple of seconds. Make it very vivid. As if you were about to to bite into it. Okay. So it's easier to do this exercise when you see an actual image of a strawberry, but maybe if you really
So dear Thai, dear community, thank you for being there with us, and thank you also for your patience. This evening was the first of the panel sharings that we had, and we were facing a few technical difficulties. So I'm happy that you all stayed and were able to embrace those difficulties and be there with us. And we will now listen to one sound of the bell, and then we will go to some questions. And Antoine is also live present with us. And so he's able to answer some of the questions that have been asked tonight. So we'll listen to one sound of the bell first.
How do I, hello, and
hello, good evening.
hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Oh, wonderful.
So we have a few people waiting to ask you questions.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
I'll just call. How do I find Tom? I can't find Tom. How do I find it? Tom. Tom, are you there?
Yes.
Can you unmute? Okay.
Yes.
Can you ask a question of Antoine?
Yes. Dear respected Thai and Sangha, hello, Antoine. We know that the plants are grow toward light. Do you think that riboflavin-like receptors and biophotonic molecules play a role in the mechanism underlying the neuroplasticity? Because in the phenomenological meditation experiences, we have the subjective experience of like eureka-like moment accompanied by light perception, or in meditation, moments of enlightenment. And also the mind is defined canonically in the Tibetan tradition as clear and knowing. So my question is that this experience with the light has some physical underlying mechanism which is really related to physical light. in the biology. In the biology. Thank you.
I spotlighted Antoine.
Yeah, but I'm muted.
I did.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
You're
Okay.
muted now.
Okay, I was on mute. I was muted. Well, it's a very speculative question. I don't know of any data, empirical data to really answer to this question, but I don't think it's really have anything to do with rhodopsin. I mean, as an opinion. One indication, for instance, that you can clearly meditate eyes closed. So I'm not sure how you meditate in your tradition, but at the end, the type of clear light that we're talking about in meditative experience, you can cultivate it when you have eyes closed or eyes open. In some meditation tradition, you can cultivate when you sleep, for instance, in lucid dreaming, when the eyes are closed and the brain is somehow isolated from any kind of external stimulation. But just simple example to illustrate that the type of experience that we're talking about when someone is reports having have a sense of mental clarity might have nothing to do with a physical stimulation related to light. So there would be different way to. So now, if you want to give more neuroscientific example, you can. Can give you just two examples to show why I don't think it's the case. Like, for instance, you can do doing some kind of neurosurgery. Sometimes you have to implant electrodes in the brain of patients who are undergoing epilepsy, and there have been a couple of observations that sometimes you need to implement them in a brain region that I've discussed in the video, which is insula, which is a region involved in feelings, but also sometimes in feeling of knowing, for instance. And in this case, they documented that you can stimulate this brain region and have people start to feel very, very ecstatic feelings, and just an illustration that it's very likely that if we need to look for a mechanism for what we subjectively experience as light, it's probably have to do with some kind of brain features, and has probably nothing to do with directly with not directly related to visual perception. There may be a link, but so I don't think it has anything to do with rhodopsin, for instance. But it's just a speculation. Hello?
Hello, Antoine. It's Heidi Sanger. My question is that you mentioned that loving kindness meditation can help people in the feeling area of the brain, and I wanted to ask, how does loving kindness meditation increase the brain's capacity in the feeling area of the brain, and could this help a person with Asperger's become more emotionally intelligent or ease their emotional struggles?
Yes, so it's a great question. I don't know for Asperger. I know a little bit about another clinical condition which is very similar, which is alexithymia. So alexithymia is a clinical condition that where a person is not very attuned to their own emotions, and they're not really aware of their emotional states, and so there is some indication that person who have alexithymia have sometimes a lack. I mean, this clinical condition is related to a lack of a decreased capacity to empathize with someone else. So the capacity to feel the experience of someone else emotion is somewhat altered, and that's correlated to a functional alteration of a brain region that I mentioned earlier, which is insular cortex in particular. So this brain region is very interesting because it's both involved in your own feelings and also in your capacity to feel the emotion states of someone. So for instance, if I experience pain, as I discussed before, that will trigger, the affective response will be highly correlated to the insula, but also another region called the cingulate cortex. So affective brain region. And when you look at, but when you feel the pain of someone else, so if I see you in pain, if I can really share your experience of suffering, for instance, it will be correlated to an activation of this very same region involved in mind pain. So I somehow simulate with my own the same networks involved in mind pain, your pain. And that's how we think in neuroscience that you can empathize with someone suffering, you can resonate. And there are indications that people with alexithymia, so they can't really understand the emotion state of other, they are lacking of, I mean, there's a deficiency in the insula in particular. So I'm not a clinician, so it's hard for me to, and I don't know, follow enough the literature on Asperger, but my understanding is that they are suffering from also alexithymia. So it's very possible that they are lacking from the same deficiency. And so now the second part of the question is whether you could potentially train these people through loving kindness meditation. So I don't know directly, I can't answer directly, but indirectly, what I can tell you that when you train yourself for several weeks, several months into practices akin to loving kindness and compassion, you are learning to develop or strengthen these networks. And so after this training, if you follow changes in the brain of the same person before and after the training in compassion and loving kindness, you can see a differences in the way this region involved in the insula in particular is gonna behave. And similarly, we found that expert meditators also show a different pattern of response in this insula. So it's very possible that if you train Asperger into these techniques, maybe you could develop and strengthen the emotional intelligence. Maybe there are already data on that in the literature, but I don't know. But from based on what I heard described, it's very possible.
Thank you.
Okay, Antoine, we have one last question from Mary Moran in Uganda.
Hello, good evening, Mary.
Can you unmute her?
Can you hear?
Yes. Good evening.
Oh, good. Good evening, everybody. So I was very interested in hearing you talk about acute and chronic pain. And my question is, when this pain is intense and keeps one from, at night, for example, from sleeping or from functioning really well during the day, has it been found that meditation would help? And I'm talking about chronic nerve pain. It's difficult to meditate when you're having an acute episode of chronic pain. But are there studies that show that meditation can help? And how much of the intensity of the pain is the second arrow, is one's own doing?
So there are two types of data in the literature. Some clinical finding and some neuroimaging finding. I could start with the former. So there are now about a dozen clinical studies which have tried to look at the impact of meditation-based intervention on chronic pain. Now, there are different types of chronic pain. Some of them are neuropathic, some are a different mechanism involved. So it's hard to generalize. But I read recently a meta-analysis, so an analysis of trying to pool all the clinical findings together. And when you combine all these findings together, the synthetic message is that mindfulness-based intervention seems to impact your relationship to pain more than the intensity of pain. So it doesn't seem to change really the intensity of the acute pain, but your well-being, so how much you relate to pain. So to summarize, it doesn't seem to have a very direct effect on the intensity itself of pain, but more on the affective aspect of pain. And
that makes,
yeah, that makes sense. So now, in terms of mechanism, as I discussed, it's yeah. So it's still hard we still don't really know everything, and it's one difficulty is that there are many techniques to cope with pain, and we are just at the beginning of the investigation, and there are some techniques that have used more concentration. So are using more some form of open awareness or mindfulness. And in the lab, we also try to look at the impact of loving kindness or self-compassion on pain perception. So to summarize, it seems that there are some indication that there is some impact, and but it's still at the beginning.
and Tong Len.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Yeah, there is Tonglen is typically a practice that could be very helpful, probably.
Yeah.
In research, so Tonglen is, for if you don't know, it's a practice when you are cultivating. You're combining together a practice of focusing the mind and a practice of loving kindness. So when you breathe in, you are taking the pain, either your pain or any type of pain. And when you breathe out, you are releasing the pain. And you can do it different ways, through simply a feeling of relaxation, or feeling sending some well-being, or sometimes some tradition that use mental imagery. You can send some light, some warmth, some rainbow, whatever you want. And so these techniques somehow help you to combine the concentrative aspect of mindfulness. So you focus on centered, and also, and then you connect it also to the, you can then, with that, you can welcome the pain and be with the pain, and you add a meaning to the pain. So it's meaning a sense of care, a sense of so I think it's probably a very powerful techniques, and we are just start to look at it in the lab. It's not published yet, and yeah, and I think it's one of the many techniques that could be used to deal with chronic pain.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Antoine, for this evening. Area, and a lot of research has been done, and I think much more research is about to follow, and will bring us some more insights into the effects of meditation, and also on our mind and how the brain is functioning. So thank you very much, Antoine. I don't know if you can hear me. Okay. So are you ready now? Yeah, okay. So thank you very much, Antoine, for being with us this evening, for both the dialogue we had before, and also for being here to answer live questions. So thank you very much. Thank you for all your work and your readiness to share your insights and your knowledge about everything that already has been done in the literature, in researching the brain and how the mind functions. And as you mentioned, also like there's a lot of studies that are kind of like in process, and many things I'm sure will be added. So it will be interesting also to follow it over the years and to see what we can also learn from insights in neuroscience. And so this has been now the first evening, and tomorrow evening we will continue with Dr. Antonova. And so thank you all very much for being here. And one more time, thank you, Antoine, for being with us this evening. And we will now listen to 3 sounds of the bell, so we can enjoy coming back to our breathing and relax our body, smile to our body, and smile to life.